that working? Can you see my screen?
John, it's a far left icon from beginning.
We're having some issues already.
You can see your screen if you just press from beginning on the PowerPoint.
Okay. There we are. Great, thank you. Okay, so I would like to remind everyone and to that we are living in an active earthquake zone, an active tsunami zone, and get started. So we live here in southwestern British Columbia. We live in an active subduction zone. This is where an ocean plate is being pushed beneath the continent. This is the Cascadia subduction zone. It extends from, as you can see in this image, from northern Vancouver Island all the way down to northern California, about 1,100 kilometers, a subduction fault. And the movement of the tectonic plates in this region, the plates are moving at about 4 centimeters per year. That's roughly how fast your fingernails grow. So you can't see it, but it's happening. And over centuries, we're talking about 4 to 5 meters of movement. The plate tectonics here generates 3 different types of earthquakes. The first, number 1, are the crustal earthquakes. These are shallow within the North American plate. And we've seen those up into the magnitude 7 to 7.5 range. The second type of earthquakes are those within the ocean plate as it sinks beneath us, 40, 50, 60 kilometers beneath the surface. And we've seen earthquakes like the Nisqually earthquake of 2001 up in the magnitude 6.8 to 7 range. And the third type are the subduction earthquakes. They're right on the boundary between the oceanic and the continental plate. Those are amongst the world's largest earthquakes, up to magnitude 9. So we have 3 very different types of earthquakes in this region. And one of the key differences, so the crustal earthquakes, we're talking about decades to centuries. The deep earthquakes, we're talking about decades between those earthquakes. And for the subduction, we're talking about centuries between those type of earthquakes. So this gives you an idea of where those 3 types of earthquakes have happened here in the past. The red stars are the large crustal earthquakes. And of note, in 1946, a magnitude 7.3 earthquake beneath Vancouver Island. And you can see some of the other large crustal earthquakes near Seattle and on the west coast of Vancouver Island. So we've had some very large earthquakes within the North American plate. We've also seen these blue stars, which are the magnitude 6.8 to 7 deep earthquakes. Those are down 50 to 60 kilometers beneath the surface, and they have not generated tsunamis in this region. The third type, the subduction, which is offshore, just to the west of Vancouver Island, and again, continuing down into Northern California. That's where the most recent earthquake in the year 1700 was a magnitude 9 earthquake. That is well described in Indigenous oral history of this region all along the coast, and has been well imaged through geological studies, again, up and down the coast, both onshore and offshore. So we do have a good handle and good idea of these types of earthquakes and how often. And also, this is just to remind you, the past year, we've had 1,151 small earthquakes in our region. So they're happening, the tiny earthquakes are happening every single day. This is a very typical pattern. Most of them are offshore along the boundaries between these tectonic plates, but we also have a lot of small earthquakes happening beneath our feet here in Victoria, Vancouver, and Seattle. The link between tsunamis, earthquakes, and tsunamis, I just wanted to talk about that for a minute. Tsunamis can be generated by a number of sources, but the most frequent is large earthquakes, and especially subduction zone earthquakes. So the earthquake in Mexico yesterday is also a subduction zone, just like here in Cascadia. So subduction earthquakes are the most effective means of producing tsunamis. It's also the movement for shallow earthquakes. The movement of the seafloor is very effective at generating tsunamis. And the third is the landslides that are triggered by earthquakes, whether they're onshore landslides, coastal landslides, or submarine landslides, as we've seen, for example, in 1946 here on Vancouver Island, an earthquake beneath land that triggered hundreds of landslides into lakes that triggered localized waves that were very, very significant. So these are some of the key sources, but there's a very strong earthquake link for all of these. The most important parameter is vertical movement of the seafloor, lifting or dropping of the seafloor that initiates a wave or a series of waves. Some of the things that are some of the parameters that are of most importance for generating tsunamis is earthquake location. Was the earthquake beneath land or sea, and how far away was it? That will directly link to the timing of tsunamis and travel times. Was it a deep earthquake or a shallow earthquake? How large was the earthquake? And what sort of movement on the fault? Was there a vertical movement associated, or was it a slipping, a horizontal slipping? The earthquake rupture, was it a 500 kilometer or 100 kilometer or 1,000 kilometer rupture? Again, is very important for the tsunami generation. And the slip distribution, how was the energy released along this fault at the time of the earthquake? So these are all things that we're working on, and we've made really significant improvements over the past number of years in terms of monitoring and providing this information. A lot of our current research is in partnership with international groups from Japan and from Chile and the US and Canadian universities. And some of the things that we're looking at right now are the imaging the Cascadia subduction zone to better understand where energy is being stored for future earthquakes and tsunamis, and how much slip can we expect along that fault. Again, understanding where tsunamis might be generated. We're also working on looking at regional faults. Are they active? How often are they active, and how large? How much movement can we expect? And another key area of research is extending the tsunami, and this is really critical, extending the tsunami and the earthquake history back in time, back thousands of years. So there's a lot of ongoing research incorporating Indigenous oral traditions and information into that, extending the history of earthquakes and tsunamis here in our backyard. And the final slide here is just reminding everyone that we do have a lot of faults through southern Vancouver Island, the Leech River Fault, Devil's Mountain Fault. So all of these black lines are faults that are being looked at in terms of potential for earthquakes and tsunamis. So I'll leave it there, and thank you very much. And this photo is from New Zealand in 2016 after the Kaikoura earthquake. There were significant landslides and soil failures. These 3 cows were trapped for about 3 days on this little patch of grass. And so a good reminder for all of us to check our earthquake kits and see if they need any updating. So thank you.
Great, thank you, John. And now I'd like to invite David Ford and Dr. Kirby to speak about tsunami modeling and the development of the 2-zone map that we'll share with you shortly.
Hi, everybody. Hello to everybody online as well. My name is David Ford. I'm a senior water resources engineer with Associated Engineering. Our team, the Associated Engineering, DHI, and Westmar Advisor team, were asked by the Capital Region District over 2 years ago now at this point to undertake the tsunami hazard mapping project for the Capital Region. So the primary players on our team were myself as project manager, Tom Foster, who's also on the call today, who is the senior technical reviewer from DHI. We also had Doctors Jim Kirby and Fengyang Shi from the University of Delaware, who were the tsunami modeling leads. and Dr. John Clegg, who's also on the call today from Westmar Advisors and Simon Fraser University, who is our geohazard specialist. So we have a handful of slides that we'll kind of step through and just explain the methodology. And Dr. Kirby will take over the back end of the presentation. So an overview of the process is essentially this graphic on the left-hand side. We take a project digital elevation model, a project DEM, which is a combination of LiDAR data, topographic data, and we stitch it with bathymetric data, bathymetric soundings provided by the Canadian Hydrographic Service. And once that gets stitched together, we essentially have a 3D model of above sea level and below sea level geometry. And that allows us then to essentially model our tsunami wave on top of that geometry. We then also select seismic sources. So Dr. Clegg led that effort on our behalf and collaborated obviously with Dr. Kirby on the modeling side, as well as chatting to many of the relevant personnel in the local industry and academia. And we selected 11 different events, combinations of sources and varying probabilities or magnitudes, which we'll demonstrate on the next slide. Then that gets plugged into what's called a tsunami wave generation, propagation, and inundation model. That's just a fancy way of saying it's modeling software, hydraulic modeling software that's able to apply hydraulic formulae over a large geographic area. We also did model validation. So that's checking the modeled wave heights against previously measured tsunami events. And then we finally produced inundation mapping or hazard mapping, which ultimately informed the 2-zone map that will be discussed later in this briefing. The graphic on the right shows an overview of how the process works. We start off with a very large geographic area at a coarse scale, and then you progressively, the closer you get to your location of interest, you step down into finer and finer grids, essentially finer resolution at your area of interest, and that's what that smallest polygon is denoting. So everywhere in the capital region was modeled to a resolution of 30 meters. So that means there's a result at every 30 meter by 30 meter grid cell, a minimum resolution. Then there was 5 areas that were selected for detailed inundation modeling, which is a really fine level of detail. So there's an elevation value every 4 meters by 4 meters. Those areas were Souk, Port Renfrew, Victoria, Esquimalt, Sydney, and Saanich. The initial tsunami water level that gets modeled is the higher high water mean tide. So the wave gets applied on top of that tide level, and that tide is the average of all the higher highs over a 19-year tidal cycle. And that's consistent with guidance offered by the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program, which provides kind of the methodology for how you would model tsunami events in the US and Canada. And following on from what John showed in his previous presentation or his previous slides, that acronym that you'll see in a second, CSED, is the Cascadia Subduction Zone. So this is a selection of some of the events that we modeled. Anything with CSED in its title is Cascadia Subduction Zone. So the top 3 there, the L1, the NS, the CS, that just means full length rupture, northern segment rupture, central segment rupture. So different areas of the subduction zone, basically creating or generating a tsunami. There is also some events like the Haida Gwaii validation event that we did, and which Dr. Kirby will speak to in a little bit more detail in a second. We also looked at the Alaska 1964 event as well, that some people may recall caused a lot of damage in Port Alberni in 1964. And our modeling actually demonstrated that the tsunami wave within the capital region would be lower than a meter, and that's kind of consistent with anecdotal evidence and reporting. So just following on from that, then I'll pass it over to Dr. Kirby.
Thanks, David. Jim Kirby. I'm with the University of Delaware. I was working with a colleague, Fengyan Shi, on this project. David has talked a lot about the scope of the modeling. I'll just give some details about what we were using. We were actually using a model called FunWave TBD, which is a University of Delaware project that Dr. Shi and I wrote together. It's a public domain, open source code. It's very heavily used in a number of applications, from tsunami to shortwave modeling, harbor oscillation modeling, even ship waves in channels nowadays. The code has been very extensively tested and used for tsunami modeling in a number of different areas. For example, for the NTHMP work in the United States, the code is used for all of the mapping on the East Coast. The plot here on the left shows essentially the internesting at 30-meter resolution for the CRD area, and then the 5 highlighted areas are the areas that were done at high resolution, at 4-meter resolution. Next slide, David, please. One of our major tasks in preparation for doing this work was providing an independent validation of the code. That has been done for tsunami applications extensively in the past. NTHMP has a number of benchmarking exercises and requirements that all the models used for the US applications have to pass. Our code has been through all of that process. For this particular project, we did a validation based on the Haida Gwaii event, for which there's extensive amount of data. And we looked at essentially validation against dark buoy data, pressure gauge data out in open water, as well as some of the more shore-related run-up events. And we also carried out a comparison against a completely separate model, just to show consistency in the modeling approaches. Now I'll give it back to David.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And with that, we'll pass it back to Alison.
Great. Thank you both, David and Dr. Kirby. I would now like to invite Ben Errol from DOBC to provide a demonstration of the new Tsunami portal.
Great. Thanks very much, Alison. My name is Ben Errol, and I'm connecting with you today from the traditional territory of the Saanich people. As John and David explained, the capital region is at risk to tsunami hazards from several potential sources. Fortunately, most of the coastline has a limited risk of tsunami, and most of the area is at a minimal risk of no risk of tsunami. So, but it's incredibly important for people to know where the tsunami hazard zones in the capital region are located, so they're informed and can understand any of the potential risks. The Tsunami Public Information Portal Map is a really cool tool that helps people visualize and learn about tsunami hazards. Being aware of the tsunami hazard zones helps people prepare now so they can act later in the event of a tsunami. Let's start on the landing page, which everyone can get to by visiting maps.preparedyourself.ca. You can view the website and map from your desktop, phone, tablet, or any other device that has a web browser. And all of the tsunami hazard data on the portal is downloadable. From this page, you'll see buttons on the top left for the interactive map, tsunami preparedness information, community resources with links to local authorities, and prepareyourself.ca, where you can find information about hazards in the region and how to get prepared. We're going to focus on the interactive map today. And if you click on that, you'll get to this page here. From here, we can see the entire Capital Regional District, and you'll see that most of it is green, but there are some yellow areas. You'll also see the panel on the right-hand side of the screen. This includes information about tsunamis and links to more emergency preparedness information. Using the search bar in the top right, you can search any address within the capital region and find out if it's in the tsunami hazard zone. As an example, let's use the BC legislature to see if it's tsunami risk. So once you hit enter, the map will zoom in on the location you've searched for. I can see that the BC legislature is in the green zone, but what does that mean? If you click the green zone or yellow area near the address, you can find out if you're inside or outside of the tsunami hazard zone. As you'll see here, the legislature is outside of the tsunami hazard zone. This means if a tsunami is coming, I should stay put and not evacuate to another location. By staying put, I'm freeing up space and roads for people who are in the yellow hazard zone to leave the area as quickly as possible. Let's see what pops up if we were along the water in the yellow zone. When you're in your tsunami hazard zone, for instance, right along the water in James Bay, public safety information and guidance will pop up. As it says here, in the event of a felt earthquake, if you're in a hazard zone, you should move outside the hazard zone immediately once the shaking has stopped. And you can find this information for locations across Capital Region from Souk to Salt Spring Island. We encourage everyone to search for their home, workplace, or kids' school address to learn if they're inside or outside of a tsunami zone. It's a really great idea to take the time now to practice your evacuation routes on foot or bike with your family, friends, or colleagues. If you're in a tsunami hazard zone, you likely won't have to travel very far to reach safety. By practicing in advance, you'll be prepared and ready in the event of tsunami. We also encourage people to grab a grab-and-go bag with things like first aid kits, medication, phone chargers, cash, and copies of important documents such as insurance papers. Contact your local emergency program to learn about local public alerting or to learn about upcoming emergency preparedness sessions. But never go to the beach to watch the waves. A tsunami can move a lot faster than you can run. In the event of tsunami, Emergency Management BC issues emergency alerts on behalf of the province, so be sure to read any alerts carefully. Wait for the all clear from local authorities to confirm the threat is over. Tsunami waves can last several hours. So thanks very much for your time. Back to you, Allison.
Great, thank you everyone for sharing. And anyone can check out the tsunami portal at maps.prepareyourself.ca. And now I'd like to turn this over to our moderator to take questions from the media.
Thank you very much, Allison. A reminder to media on the line, please press *1 to enter the queue for the opportunity to ask a question and a follow-up. Our first question today comes from Rob Buffum, CTV Vancouver Island. Please go ahead, Rob.
Oh, hi, thank you for the presentation. I was having a tricky time getting it to work on my phone, but maybe it's better on a computer. But I guess my first question is just, as I understand it, the fundamental thing to do if you are about to experience a tsunami is get to high ground above 4 meters. What are the other 2 or 3 nuggets? I mean, you talked about having a grab-to-go kit, and don't obviously go to the beach to watch waves. But apart from getting to higher ground, what would be the 1 or 2 other things you'd say would be most important to do if a tsunami happens?
Hi, it's Tanya Patterson here at the City of Victoria's Emergency Program Coordinator. I can answer that question for you. So the number one thing is understanding your risk right now. So visiting that map, knowing if you're in the tsunami hazard area where you live, work, or play. And if you are, then having a kit ready to go for the essential items that you'll need if you do need to evacuate quickly. Having a plan of where you'll go and how you'll get there on foot or bike. And also a number one thing for all emergency preparedness is connecting with your neighbors and your community and friends and family. So helping those around you that might need assistance.
Do you have a follow-up, Rob?
I do. Is there anything you can do if you happen to have the misfortune of finding your home in one of those yellow zones? Is there anything you can do to tsunami-proof your home? I feel silly asking that, but is there anything you can do to, prevent damage from being worse than it otherwise would be?
I'm not an expert on that mitigation for the buildings, but maybe one of the engineers on the call might be a better resource or could direct you to someone.
I would say if your building is directly in the path of the wave, there's not a whole lot that you can do. Actually, beachfront structures that have tended in the past to survive the best are your typical motel kinds of structures where you have, basically walls that are perpendicular to the coastline with like either, glass or very flimsy fronts and backs that are going to be impacted by the wave, and basically the wave just blasts through. Yeah, it's not. If an energetic wave is going to arrive at your building, it's not a good scenario. Elevation helps as well. I mean, there is an effort ongoing to improve building codes and standards in the United States in response to this. American Society of Civil Engineers has published a fair amount of information about what the codes should look like. And that would be the place to start, but existing structures are fairly vulnerable.
Now, before moving on, would anybody like to add to that response? If not, we'll go to the next reporter. Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the next reporter. We next hear from Ollie Herrera, Check News. Ollie, please go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my call. I just have a question about the map. I see right now, so it's for the CRD area. Are there any plans, or do you have any idea when this map could be extended to the rest of the island or even other parts of the province? I guess similar to how like Wildfires BC's interactive map is. Are there any plans to expand this?
This is Allison. I think I can address this. So I just want to acknowledge that this study was funded through both provincial and federal funding sources through the National Disaster Mitigation Program. And the study area was limited to the Capital Regional District at this time. And I might just turn it over to Ben for any provincial plans to expand into the future.
Thanks very much, Allison. We continue to look for opportunities. We want to assess the success of this particular application and see where we can go from here. But we definitely see a lot of application in this type of modeling.
Any further feedback before we go to a follow-up? And seeing none, we'll move on. Ollie, do you have a follow-up question?
Sorry, just bouncing off that last part. I thought I heard him saying expand opportunities to expand based on the success of the application. So is this sort of, I guess, like maybe still at the pilot stages? Are you guys going to maybe try this out for a year or two? I hope I didn't misinterpret that answer. We
would like to do more modeling. we do have some of the focus of the data. We have available data through the NDMP program, and we're seeking out future opportunities for this.
And final call for reporters who'd like to ask a question, please press *1 to enter the queue for the opportunity to ask a question and a follow-up. I'll pause here to see if we have any further questions. And seeing none, that concludes today's conference. Thank you very much. Allison, do you have any closing remarks?
No, I don't. I would just acknowledge that this was informed by dozens of regional partners and hundreds of people shared their time and expertise to contribute to this. So I'd like to acknowledge and thank everyone who participated in this from the beginning of the tsunami modeling and mapping project to what you see today that's available for public consumption.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all our participants, and thank you to the media. That concludes today's event.
Thank you so much, everyone.